Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Have you seen the book called Spencer and Locke? You maybe haven't because it's not on the stands yet, but David Pepose has written a very fun comic that if you want to do a mashup of Calvin and Hobbes and crime comics, Spencer and Locke is your book. It's a very funny book, but it also takes itself very seriously as well. And I think the result is a parody that, as I say in the interview, stays on the right side of being original, but you can see where the influences are. Jorge Santiago is the artist, and I should point out, if you liked Criminal, Brubaker and Sean Phillips' excellent story that was a parody of Archie and was a crime comic, it's in that same neighborhood. But again, definitely different, definitely original, and a lot of fun to read. It's from Action Lab Comics, and it comes out in a couple weeks. But have David on the show now. And, you know, David also is a contributor to Newsarama, and as such, wanted to get his opinion on the current comic market. He's entering the comic market as a creator at one of the smaller publishers. And what's it like to compete in today's comic field? We talk about that. We talk about Marvel and DC. Very long conversation, but a very interesting one with David Pepose on today's Word Balloon. It's brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you, League, for your support. I've talked about it recently that I, unfortunately, am between radio jobs and would love Word Balloon to be a full-time commitment. If you have an interest in helping me out, if you enjoy the show, and if you can afford it, would you consider subscribing to Word Balloon via Patreon? If you go to my front page, there's a link right there with a Patreon ad that will take you to my Patreon homepage for Word Balloon, or you can go to patreon.com/wordballoon, and that's patreon.com/wordballoon. Thank you, League of Word Balloon listeners. There are new subscribers that have been joining every week, and it means a lot. It makes it easier to afford to do the show, to upgrade equipment, which I've already done with a new laptop at the beginning of the year. Some money has gone into other fun toys that, as the year progresses, you will see me exploit. But if you think Word Balloon is worth the price of a comic, if you could spare, $5 a month, that's great. If you could spare $1 a month, that's great. Well, it really does help. And there are thousands of you out there that listen. There are hundreds of you out there that are subscribing to Word Balloon, and you are the League of Word Balloon listeners. I thank you very much. Again, another way to help me out is let a friend know that you think Word Balloon is a great show, and they might enjoy it too. Word Balloon is also brought to you by In-Stock Trades at InStockTrades.com. Let's go through the list of current deals at InStockTrades.com. You can get the new Teen Titans trade paperback Volume 6, going back to the 80s, for Marv Wolfman and Mike Barr. This one collects New Teen Titans 35 through 41 and Batman and the Outsiders number 5. It features the first Fearsome 5, and Thunder and Lightning are in the book. It's one of the good ones. It's 42% off, $11.59. You can also get Grant Morrison's Invisibles trade paperback book 1 with Steve Yowell. Am I saying his name right? I certainly hope so. But it's the start of the Invisibles, collecting the first 12 issues and Absolute Vertigo number 1. 42% off, $14.49. How about Alpha Flight by John Byrne? The omnibus hardcover is 42% off, just $58. That's a cool big ticket item. You can get the Daredevil omnibus hardcover, going back to the beginning. It's Daredevil 1 through 41, the first annual, Fantastic Four number 73, and even stuff from Not Brand Eck number 4. Stan Lee, lots of different artists, including Bill Everett, Joe Orlando, Wally Wood, John Romita, Gene Colan. 50% off. It's just $62.50. Some of the great deals happening right now at InStockTrades.com. Check it out for yourself. Remember, if your orders are $50 or more, you receive free shipping from InStockTrades.com. Okay, without further ado, let's start off our conversation with David Pepose. Quick side note, once we got started, about 10 minutes in, we were getting some digital fuzz from Skype, and it was making it hard to understand David. So we switched to his cell phone. I stayed on Skype and managed to have a nice 2-hour conversation. So just wanted to let you know that as we get into our talk with David Pepose, now on Word Balloon. All right, I was ready to call him Prepose, but it's David Pepose joining us now on Word Balloon, former Newsarama cohort, and he's still there. I'm not, but good news is he's also doing a very interesting comic called Spencer and Locke from Action Lab. It's a pleasure to talk to you, David. Welcome to Word Balloon.
Well, thanks, John. Thanks for having me. Longtime fan of the show. This is a little bit of a kind of a pinch me moment to be here. So thanks for having me.
That's really nice. I appreciate that. Congrats on the first book, man. Is this your first attempt at a comic book story?
This is my first published thing. There are certainly I've written a few comic scripts that are they're never going to see the light of day, but this is the first thing that I wanted to I wanted the world to see, and thankfully Jorge and I wound up with Action Lab as our publisher, and they've been very supportive of us since the get-go, since the moment they saw our pitch, and they've let us tell our story exactly the way we want to tell it, and we're excited. It just hit previews this past week.
Congratulations, and man, I'll tell you, Action Lab. I saw their presentation in San Diego last summer. I don't know if you were there.
Mm-hmm. No, I wasn't there for that, but I actually did get to sit in on their panel at New York this last year. They actually announced the book during the panel, which was kind of a that's like a bucket list kind of thing.
Sure.
No, they've been fantastic, and honestly, like seeing the work that they are putting out there. I mean, they've got books like Tomboy, Americarati, Cougar and Cub, Infinite Seven. I mean, Spencer and Locke is standing with some really alongside some very talented and creative books, and we're just happy to be a part of the team.
Yeah, it's their Danger Zone imprint, and I mean, right there on the cover, mature readers. But you were going in the direction I was going in and saying, yeah, Action Lab. I really think they started and were always a fun kids line, and I think had some really creative books. But I really do think that they've kicked it up a notch and are really trying to broaden their brand. And I was very impressed with that presentation last summer at San Diego Comic-Con, and I think they're in the right direction. And Spencer and Locke is representative of that. It's for people who haven't heard the pitch, because it's pretty self-evident when they maybe not when they see the cover, well, kind of when they see the cover, because you might think of a black sad kind of crime comic when you see that excellent cover. But then the first page right away, this is a parody of sorts. But give them the 10-cent tour on Spencer and Locke.
Yeah, well, we definitely wear our influences on our sleeve, as you said, from our very first page. Our elevator pitch, which I think helped us sell the book, is what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? So our book is hard-boiled detective Locke comes back to his old neighborhood, the scene of a very traumatic upbringing, following the murder of his childhood sweetheart, Sophie Jenkins. And the only friend that Locke can trust to help him close the case is his talking imaginary panther named Spencer. So this is very much, it's an action-packed crime noir story, but it's very much kind of this black parody. But at the same time, there's also this very, I think, human story underneath. This is very much a story about sort of confronting the demons of one's own past and asking ourselves, we all have scars, but what do we do with them? Are we defined by them? Can we transcend them, or are we always destined to succumb to them? You get flashbacks, as you say, of Spencer's childhood, and there are obvious nods to Calvin and Hobbes and everything. Clearly, that's a big. I imagine you were a Spaceman Spiff fan. Not only Calvin Hobbes, but also Spaceman Spiff, and I think that shows in a good way. Go on. Oh, well, I will say, one of the great things about sort of being able to work to sort of meld Bill Watterson's iconography with sort of this moody, noirish Frank Miller style is we have a lot of fun avenues to investigate. And I won't spoil anything too much. Suffice to say that we go everywhere. And Spaceman, certainly, we did not ignore Spaceman. And I will say,
oh, maybe is that coming up later in the story? Yeah.
Yes, and I will say it's my favorite part of the entire series. I can't give too much away beyond that. Suffice to say, stick around for issue 3.
Well, this is a pretty violent book, and yet I can't help, because of its inspiration in terms of the Calvin and Hobbes stuff, also laugh while it's happening. So am I sick for laughing? Is this, I mean,
no,
well, like you say, you're going everywhere, but I mean, well, go ahead. You start with that. I mean, so yeah, am I sick for laughing?
No, not at all. Not at all. It's one of those things. I mean, thankfully, our book is written and drawn as such that it is kind of a little bit of the eye of the beholder, and there's a lot of different rooms for a lot of different interpretations, all of which are valid. But I can say, as me writing this, people say that writers are horrible to their creations, and yes, I was horrible to Detective Locke and his Panther friend Spencer in this book. We put them through the ringer hardcore, and I can tell you there's so many bits and pieces of this script that I wrote, and I was a little horrified that I wrote it, and I was like, okay, if I'm horrified, I'm probably in the right direction, because the one thing that I wanted to make sure with this book is yes, there are some very kind of shocking and subversive moments. You can even see it on our very first page. But it's all there's always a purpose for it. It's there's definitely a redemptive arc to this entire series. But at the same time, yeah, like this is a guy, Locke is screwed up. He is like messed up beyond belief. And there's a running theme in this book that it's not just like one bad day. This is a lot of bad days. And, it gets dark. It gets very, very dark before it starts to lighten up a bit. And thankfully we have sort of that buddy cop banter, that sort of sense of humor to lighten things up a little bit. But this is definitely has its roots in the blackest of comedy for sure.
Okay. And shit, forgive me for calling Locke Spencer. I'm stuck down the fact I'm a Robert Parker fan. And in fact, wanted to see if you spelled Spencer with an S like Robert Parker does, but you got to see that's okay. And yeah, so Spencer is the Panther, and Locke is the detective.
Well, it's one of those things when going back to the original Calvin and Hobbes, they were named after philosophers, and I think it was for a reason. And so part of the reason why these characters named Spencer and Locke is I dug through. I said I want to find some philosopher names that really they work together. They kind of click in that Calvin and Hobbes sort of sense. And Spencer and Locke, really just kind of like it worked well together. And what's funny is
so John Locke, and is it Edmund Spencer or?
I mean it's one of those things. It's actually funny. I did not intend this, but the philosopher Spencer actually he was the one who came up with the phrase survival of the fittest. And I did not know that until I actually wrote it in the dialogue myself. Later on, I think after we had already finished the book, I was just looking up Spencer on a whim. And I was like, oh, he actually came up with that. So listen, if anybody reads this book, you guys can just pretend that I'm super on it and I knew exactly what I was doing. And then Locke, as Lucifer, was all about sort of this, he really examined how experiences help shape one's perspective on things. And that's very much our character. Locke is the kind of guy he is shaped by his past, and he's shaped by his childhood, and he's shaped by his traumas. And as you can see, he's brought back because of his past. He's brought back because of an old flame. Locke returns home to his old neighborhood to find his childhood sweetheart has been murdered. And that's what so much of Spencer and Locke is about. It's sort of confronting these old demons of your past and having to really face the unfaceable and sort of the lengths the mind will go to protect itself. In this case, creating your own best friend.
But obviously, too, that psychosis is pretty played out in the first chapter. and I would assume as well. Is this an ongoing? How do you envision this? That it,
we're a 4-issue series at the moment, but if the readers respond and there's a desire for more Spencer and Locke, I definitely have ideas for at least 2 more arcs.
Cool.
These characters are very, their voices were very fun to kind of lock in on. No pun intended. And, it's just, they have so much personality to them. And I think that goes back to, the philosopher bent that we were talking about earlier, which is, these guys have a lot of points of views about life. And it's not always the most, it's not always the big things. In fact, it's often sort of the smallest details that they pontificate about. But I think that brings a lot of the humor to this book as well.
Are you going to get to any sort of, hidden secret of why Locke had to manifest Spencer the way that he did?
There's no hard and fast answer, but we'll see, as the series progresses, several of these very, very bad days that make Spencer, that made Spencer a requirement for survival. Spencer is very much sort of Locke's protector figure, but he's also, he represents his animal intuition, sort of his skills as a detective, these abilities to use these like keen animal senses to pick up the smallest of clues. Mm-hmm. But he's also, he's Locke's sense of humor. He's also kind of his good side. He's very much the good cop to Locke's very, very bad cop. So sort of seeing the two play and bounce off one another, for me, is really kind of one of the draws of the series.
Very cool. Tell me about Jorge Santiago, your artist. How'd you find it?
Jorge.
How'd you guys get together?
Fantastic. So we got together. Actually, I blame Justin Jordan for all of this because, if anyone who follows him on Facebook, he's very outspoken about, his thoughts on comics process and the comics business. And, as someone who's kind of a process junkie myself, I always tune in to see what Justin has to say. And I remembered him talking about how he got together with Tradd Moore for The Strange Talent of Luther Strode. Mm-hmm. And that's when things started like kind of clicking for me because, I think this is a well-written book, but I can also easily say I'm the weakest member of the creative team. And so, hearing Justin talk about how he met Tradd and how Tradd was a graduate of the Savannah College of Art and Design, I said, there are schools that teach people how to do sequential art. And so I looked around through, several alumni portfolios, and I found Jorge's, and I remember very clearly seeing on his website that he makes comics and art with, quote, stupid amounts of passion. And I said, that's the guy. Because, listen, people don't make comics for the money. They do it because they, for love of the game. And I knew, working with somebody young and hungry, that's exactly what you need in order to go the long haul of even a 4-issue book. Because, it's so funny, and I'm sure you can empathize because you interview people all the time as well. But I can tell you, comics journalism was both the best preparation for making a book and also didn't prepare me in the slightest. Uh-huh. It's sort of it's like having a kid. You can talk to as many people as you want. You can hear all the stories in the world, but nothing's going to prepare you for when that baby drops.
Well, what helped you, kind of get your writing skills then?
Well, a lot of it was doing interviews, actually. I used to do a column called Writer's Workshop and Artist's Alley. And so a lot of the great building blocks that I took out of those interviews. I was fortunate enough to interview writers like Nick Spencer, Rick Remender, Greg Pak, all of which every time I do an interview, I'm like, oh, okay, like I'm getting it. This is clicking. It's making sense. And, I over the last few years, I sort of started very, very slowly dipping my toes into writing. And I think ultimately that's, some people dive into the pool wholeheartedly. That's not who I am. So I started with some very short scripts. I would do 6-page comic scripts, and I would write them. I would write one a day just to see if I could do a beginning, middle, and end, just to get it done with. And then once I sort of felt more comfortable with that, I started writing full-on scripts. And these were not even original scripts. Sometimes I would write things with some of my favorite characters from the Big Two, just to see how it felt. Then I wrote a screenplay. And it's funny because my screenplay was much more kid-friendly than Spencer and Locke. And once I finally finished with that, I said, okay, I'm going to sort of switch gears. I want to go for something much darker. And, I had the idea for Spencer and Locke. I was walking home from work one day in New York City, and I remember seeing a remixed Calvin and Hobbes strip where Calvin is doing his homework, and Hobbes goes, don't you want to go out and play? And Calvin goes, listen, Mom just put me on new medication, and it's really helping my focus. So I really need to hunker down. And Hobbes is like, really? That's not like you. And Calvin goes, listen, I need to do my homework. And the last panel is just Calvin doing his homework, and there's this lifeless doll.
Yeah, I've seen that. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And, that was sort of the moment where it all kind of clicked. I was like, oh. And even then, so much of this book was just, okay, this is fun. Let's take it another step. And, it was sort of, I'm kind of pinching myself because we've taken so many little steps to get here, and now we're here.
I can appreciate that.
And yeah, but I feel like, going back to the original point that I rambled away from.
No, that's okay. I was going to get us back to Jorge, so please, go on. Or process. What did you want to get back to?
I'll give Jorge his
yeah, because I don't want to. I felt bad. I'm like, wait a minute. I think I screwed Jorge in asking you about
no
process.
Listen,
so go
Jorge,
ahead.
I'm telling you, he is so talented, and one of the objectives that I had for writing the script was I wanted to really be able to shift gears in terms of visuals, because call me a fatalist. I said, if this is the only comic I'm ever going to write, I want it to have everything. And so we switch gears so much. And Jorge, I'm telling you, that he has not found a challenge that he couldn't just knock out of the park. I mean, without spoiling too much, he does fist fights, he does flashbacks, he does car chases, he does gunfights. He even, without giving too much away, does a really mean spaceship.
Excellent. Good to know.
he really just knocks everything out of the park. And the great thing, because being a sort of a process junkie myself, Jorge, he comes from this SCAD background. He's so thoughtful about everything. He really has this deep well of knowledge that influences every page he draws, every panel he works on. And that's great because I also come from a pretty deep knowledge well myself, but it's a very different knowledge base. And so having the two of us sort of coming together with these very different backgrounds and sort of being able to interface the two of them, I think it made for a much stronger final product. Because he and I we'd trade emails, we'd go like pages and pages over like a simple panel layout, because we would always sort of try to figure out we were always reinventing the wheel. We were always trying to figure out, is there a better way to tell this? And I think that back and forth really brought our A game out. I think there's no artist who I would rather have worked with on this project. No partner greater than Jorge Santiago Jr.
Well, tell me, go ahead.
Oh, no, and I was just going to say, and I'd be remiss if I didn't, mention our other creative team members.
Hold on now, because let me get in there. I wanted to ask, how clearly Jason Smith's coloring on this is, as is Jorge's art, a very big part of this story. Had they worked together? I mean, did he
No.
Jason? How did? Oh, that's amazing. Now you tell me about Jason Smith.
Well, listen, Jason. I will say, to give you a little bit of background, it took us forever to get our pitch out. It took us from the moment that I met Jorge and we signed up. It took 9 months for us to get just the first 6 pages in the cover together. And part of the reason why that was we struggled very hard to find a colorist. We had found one colorist who just wasn't the right fit for the project, and then we found a second colorist who took our money but did not deliver any actual pages, just kind of vanished.
Oh, that's
and it was pretty demoralizing. And thankfully, Taylor Esposito actually recommended Jason Smith, and it was like alchemy. You know, you see, I sent Jason Jorge's first 6 pages and the cover, which is what everybody can see on our preview pages. By the way, we did not change one thing from our pitch pages to what you guys are going to be seeing. And I saw those pages come in, and I was just like, this is the guy. Like, I don't think I had any edits for him on those first 6 pages. I mean, they just were dynamite. And Jason is really, I mean, he's the ultimate team player. I mean, the thing is, having come from an editorial background, I'm always used to sort of making little tweaks and nudges here and there. And Jason was endlessly patient dealing with me in that regard. And, you know, sort of working with him, you know, Jason and I would go back and forth on pages constantly. And we were working on colors for the book up until, I think around Halloween of last year.
Wow.
And, yeah, I mean, like, he and I would just go back and forth for days. And, you know, part of the inspiration beyond, you know, for all this, I will always give him a shout out. Chris Sotomayor. I did a comics coloring class with him, actually, a few years back, and just to sort of learn the process of it. And I've always been a big believer, color makes or breaks a book. And
yes,
as you were saying, Jason he was exactly the right guy for the job. He really just sort of, you know, every issue sort of has its own color palette in addition to its own unique visuals. And so there's always a power color in each issue. And Jason just has found such great ways to kind of fit it in with each issue. I mean, honestly, Jorge and Jason, they're really the dream team to beat.
They no, honestly, I could see. You know, I think the impact would you know, probably still be conveyed if it was just Jorge. But yeah, Jason's colors really makes everything pop, and I think some of his, just like you have story homages to Frank Miller and Bill Watterson, I think Jason's color inspirations will be very self-evident, and I'm sure that's by design between the two of you guys going over the kind of look that you were going for and what he could do. I think, you know, both of you, I'm very, very impressed because I do think it does carry the tone of each scene, and it's incredibly effective.
Well, thank you. I mean, you know, it's one of those things. So much of this book was just kind of trying to put my money where my mouth is. You know, I mean, I wrote reviews for comics for many years, and I've had plenty of people say, "Well, what are your qualifications?" And I mean, I've tinkered around on sort of the outskirts of the industry. I got my start interning and temping over at DC Comics, and I've done the outskirts of the business. But after a while, I felt like, okay, you know what? I've learned so much just by being part of the online comics community that I feel like it was almost an overnight thing. I just said, okay, I want to put that into practice. And, you know, thankfully I've been working with just such a spectacular creative team who, I mean, we've talked about it ad nauseum, but they deserve it.
Sure.
It's the visuals on Spencer and Locke, those alone are worth the price of admission outside of any sort of our more subversive story twists.
Now, you said that there's a 6-page preview. Is that at Action Lab? Give the URL where people can find the preview.
Ooh, let's see. I know you.
Is it on their website?
Let me check. I know. It's figuring out where exactly we've been. We've been in a lot of places. I know you can also. I'll give us a plug right now. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. Our username is Spencer and Locke. That's just one word with an E at the end. Those will have all of our previews. I believe ActionLabComics.com should have our preview pages somewhere.
I'm sorry, that was, you said Facebook or Twitter? Where'd you say that was?
Yeah, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You'll be able to find Spencer and Locke.
Yeah.
And we have our preview pages. We have a link to our trailer as well. And we're slowly but surely starting to roll out all of our preview pages everywhere. Because listen, Calvin and Hobbes it's one of those iconic sorts of pairings that even the most casual comics reader knows about. And being able to sort of take that iconography and, yes, tell a darker story, but also one that's a little bit more redemptive, it's really appealing. And I think it's something that comics fans everywhere are really going to dig.
Absolutely. And I would, I guess for convenience sake, I would say either go to Facebook or Twitter or as Dave just said. I'm sorry, I'm not paying attention because I was looking it up while we were talking. I'm like, all right, where's the URL? But no problem. Yeah, go to the Facebook page, go to Twitter, check out the 6 pages of preview because I really do think it's a good way to know. And that's nice that you're giving enough of a sample where it's like, all right, I'm in. It looks cool, and I think people will not be disappointed.
Oh well, no, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it, and I think I know a lot of fans out there. It's a crowded marketplace out there. I can understand why people are very hesitant to part with their money on an indie book like ours. And just calling your local comic shops, pre-ordering. You can hit us up on social media anytime. We're very responsive. And you can pre-order our book using the code FEB171047. I think people are going to be pleasantly surprised. Hopefully they won't call us blasphemers. Hopefully they will enjoy us poking fun at two masters who we just love from the bottom of our hearts. Bill Watterson and Frank Miller. Really, this book wouldn't exist without either of them. I don't think we would exist in this industry without them. And this is sort of our combination of gentle ribbing and heartfelt appreciation for two modern masters.
I think the tribute's there, but I also do think that it stands on its own. And you're not the first to mash up a humor comic strip with crime. I mean, yep. Brew Baker did it a couple of years ago with Archie and Criminal, and
it was a big inspiration for us.
Absolutely, man. No, and that shows. But again, it stays on the right side of inspiration, and I don't think it is like anything more like a ripoff or anything. No, you're clearly coming up with an original idea, and really, again, the art speaks for itself. It will in the preview as well. So while we do talk about this crowded independent field. Yeah. Given your other hat at Newsarama, I'm always happy to have some shop talk and see what others think of where the industry is right now. It is a crowded field, and I don't mean, and really, I mean, obviously you're going to experience it yourself once the book hits the stands and right now pre-order time and everything. But let's talk about the indie field, and then we'll talk more about the big boys and everything.
Absolutely,
and what you think's happening on both sides of the street. So in the indie field, It really is frustrating that there are so many great books out there because it really does make it difficult to choose. And, I mean, God, I really need to be a millionaire to maintain my love for every comic that I would like to read on a monthly basis.
For sure. So. Well, and I think so much of it is, ideas are a dime a dozen, and I think so often in our industry, as well as entertainment in general, we focus so much on the premise that I think we lose the execution. And this might come from me being kind of a process nerd and me having been a critic for so long. But I think that's the difference between a good idea and a great story is execution. And I think there are plenty of books out there. Those are the ones that I sort of gravitate to, are the ones where, you might not even need a huge, strong, high-concept elevator pitch, whereas you'll know what Jason Aaron and Jason Latour's Southern Bastards looks like, or you'll know what four kids walk into a bank looks like. Mm-hmm. Books like these, those are the ones that really, you read them every month. It's like watching a great basketball player on the court, or watching a great musician hit the stage. It's not so much about what is this concept. It's, well, how do these guys, let's see what they're going to do this month. And I think so many books these days, so many of them, they shoot for the premise, and they figure the book will rest based on that. And I think that's a tougher thing to sell these days, because like you said, everybody's coming out with books. And I think, based on the talks that I've had with retailers about Spencer and Locke, I think it's a very uncertain time right now, and I think a lot of people either don't have the money to buy books, or they're losing interest. And so I think ultimately, it's those indie creators that are going to really sort of inject more enthusiasm back into the industry, in lieu of some more event-driven storytelling at the big two.
Well, I want you to clarify when you say premise versus what they're going to do next month. Are you saying then that they're shooting more for the big story and the graphic novel, and each month is more of a slice of that story versus okay, we've been entertained for 30 days, we'll see.
Yeah,
or whatever. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's very much you sort of see that this is the story of just to throw out a random premise out there. Here's the story of an alien biker gang who has ransacked a Texas town. That high concept could probably sell a trade. It could probably go into development either in film or television, but you need to be a lot deeper than that on a month-to-month basis. And Heidi MacDonald actually talked about this. She called it the satisfying chunk, and that was really kind of a guiding principle for Spencer and Locke. And I think it's those sorts of books that, yes, they read well in a collection, but ultimately you want each issue to stand on its own. You want each issue people to read it and say, oh yeah, that was awesome. I want to see what happens next month. Yeah. And I feel like creators like, Jason Aaron, Jason Latour over on Southern Bastards, or Team Batgirl, with Cameron Stewart and Brendan Fletcher and Babs Tarr. That book in particular, every chapter kind of stood on its own. And I feel like this might be just my personal taste, but I feel like we've seen the age of decompression go on for so long that I think sometimes books wind up sort of falling into that trap of being almost a month-to-month bait and switch, where every month you pick up the book and you hope something's going to happen, and you get to the end page and there's a cliffhanger, and nothing really happened. It was very, it's kind of zero-calorie storytelling.
Yeah, an empty scene. No, I know what you mean, and I share the frustration. I think the further frustration, honestly, as a consumer is that, those are the bad books, but the real problem is there's probably close to 100 good books out there.
That's true.
Honestly, really, because the writers and artists that we've already mentioned, and colorists, and they're artists obviously as well, but that's what I mean. All of these people, they kind of get it, and now they're doing their own creator-owned books. And you mentioned the Jasons with Southern Bastards, and
Yep.
Matt Rosenberg. Is it Rosenberg, Matt?
Yep.
All right, I want to make sure I'm saying Matt, because I haven't had Matt on yet and everything. But yeah.
Or Rick Remender and Jerome Pena over.
Certainly. Kelly Sue and Val DeLandro and, that's the thing. All of these people that, we've been covering between us, for all these many years. That's the thing. These guys get it and women get it. And and there's a few more that we haven't mentioned, but that's the thing. It's like I said, I can easily come up with 100. Well, that's a lot.
And it's true. And I think we always, and I talk about this with some of my friends all the time. They're sick of me talking about this, but I think there's always this sort of symbiotic cycle between the creator-owned side and the big two. And you have people. It used to be people would start off at Marvel or DC, and then they would get a big enough name for themselves, and then they'd jump to Image, and then they'd get a really big name for themselves, and they'd keep innovating and refining their craft, and then they'd come back to the big two, but at an entirely different tier of storytelling. And I think it's now in reverse. I think people are starting off at Image and Boom and Dynamite and IDW and Action Lab, and they're doing their time at the big two. And some of them stick it out, and some of them can go the distance, and others, I think, find that they're more at home with their own creator-owned sensibilities. And I think that's what's going to sort of stabilize the industry more is if the big two can lend some more stability to the creator-owned side of the equation, while the creator-owned side of the equation can sort of add some more innovation and really liven up some of the storytelling over at the big two.
When you say stability, do you mean storytelling stability? What kind of stability are you looking for?
Well, I think in terms of lending a certain cachet to creators who might not have a big name, because I feel like, listen, there are people who are diehard comics consumers who, yes, they try out as many books as they can, and I love those people. Those people are our future. But I think there are just as many consumers out there who say, I want to see, I just saw Guardians of the Galaxy. I want a book with Rocket Raccoon.
Right.
And being able to sort of have that push and pull between, bringing readers to established properties thanks to the creators behind them, and also the reverse, introducing readers to these creative voices because of recognized properties. I think that's going to go. That's the sort of balance that we'll never really hit an equilibrium with. That it's always going to be a push and pull, and it's always going to be a cycle. But I think having that sort of back and forth is that's what's going to sort of keep bringing energy to the medium, and it's going to sort of help us figure out what's the next kind of storytelling era are we going to tell.
I agree with that, but I also think that the big two is still limited in how many seats there are at both places.
For sure.
Again, you've got a lot of talented people. I mean, we've heard almost the anger in fans and also creators that kind of demand, an A-list audience, an A-list paycheck, and an A-list, platform.
For sure.
And I, there's only so many jobs in the NBA, to go back to your basketball metaphor.
Yep.
And that's the thing. And that's why I'm glad that creators are making their own way. Like you said, there are some that, maybe try working at DC and Marvel. It's not their thing. And it's like, that's all right. And then they go back to doing their own thing. And that's really smart and great.
Yeah.
But then there is that other group, too, that would love to break in, can't, because there's just no room at the inn. They're going to have to innovate and, hopefully find, obviously, work at the other places. Yep. Or, even, create our own and be putting it online and eventually, or doing a Kickstarter for a collection and stuff. I think of my buddy Ryan Brown as a prime example of that. I don't think ever was even interested in going to DC or Marvel. But, has really kind of made his own way. I guess he's the example you were talking about. But, I don't know. Like I said, I think there's just this anger. The push-pull thing, I don't think that's ever going to change. And like you said, it's going to go up and down with the audience response to various books and stuff like that. But regardless, yeah, it is interesting. I wonder if this. I don't know. What do you think is inspiring more people to get involved versus other decades? I mean, do you think? I mean, I guess. Yeah. Tell me what's changed.
Well, I think part of it, I mean, you can't underestimate, the impact of the internet. I mean, the internet is, of course, globalized comics as an industry, as it has every other industry. And I think that opportunity has also, afforded more and more publishers to spring up, and so you have, where I think it, me growing up, I think comics were a little bit more monolithic in terms of the companies and the opportunities. And now you have a ton of other companies that are willing to sort of expand on and experiment. And, I think it, between all that and comics are, listen, as an industry, there are plenty of things that are still wrong about comics, and there are plenty of things that still need fixing. But I always like to think that we're always taking steps forward, and we're always sort of we're trying new things, and we're trying to open our arms up to people, and we're trying to be diverse and inclusive. And I think it also goes back to what we were talking about with Jorge and his website. It's passion, and I think we're seeing an age where more and more people are. It's not enough for them just to consume, and they want to be involved in this medium and this industry in a more personal, hands-on way, whether that's writing about comics or doing interviews with comics creators or reviewing comics on a week-to-week basis, or taking that step and trying to make comics of your own. So I think, and with the sort of explosion of creator-owned books and people realizing that this is sort of a viable way to make a living at times, people are saying, well, I have an idea, and it doesn't have to be somebody in a cape and tights, although, trust me, I love capes and tights just as much as anybody, probably more so. But people are saying, well, there are other genres out there, and there are other twists that can be taken, and not only that, but I think, people are starting to realize, and I think this is a heartening thing for our industry as a whole, is it's not just, I mean, I love superheroes, but it's superheroes are not synonymous with comics anymore. And that people are sort of, they're able to try their hand with things like noir or things like sci-fi or things like romance or fantasy or any other number of different avenues for storytelling. And that's when, and the fact that people are receptive to that, that's the thing is the general public is getting more and more open-minded about comics and the different avenues that we can take. And I think people are seeing they're sensing the demand, and they're saying, okay, we're going to try our hands at this. We're going to see what we can create. And I don't know. It's very exciting, both as a creator and a reader.
Sure. No, I agree. And as what we do in terms of just kind of watching and reporting on it and everything. What do you think of Riverdale? Speaking of other genres that are being explored and stuff, have you watched the 2 episodes?
I have, and it's one of those things. I watched it, and I had so much fun watching it. I feel like if people, a little selfishly, I said this is going to be how other people feel when they read my book. I can already tell, because it's such a subversive take on the Archie mythos, and it's so funny because in certain ways it feels like the mirror universe version of Mark Waid's relaunch of Archie.
Yes,
which was very, is very, is very contemporary, but still very wholesome, and it sort of had that brightness to the interpersonal teen drama. This is like everybody here's got a goatee. Like, I mean, this is everything. Everything is there. There's monsters hiding in the shadows in this version of Riverdale, and Archie is morally compromised beyond belief, and Betty and Veronica, surprisingly, considering they were the most like edgy part of the original Archie mythos, in my opinion.
Sure.
And now in the show, I feel like it's kind of the most positive dynamic in the show. I mean, it's great. It really like it's I feel like sometimes shocking people is a good way to get their attention. And I feel like Spencer and Locke is of course, an example of that. And so no, these 2 episodes for Riverdale, I've been really digging them, and in part because I'm always curious. I'm like, what are they going to do next? What are they going to do next?
Right.
So yeah, no, I've been watching them, and can't wait to see what they do next.
Yeah, no, it's a great addition to CW's comic book programming, and it's another Berlanti show. I mean, and that's those guys. They've got the Midas touch, and I don't know how you feel, but I almost wonder. I'm certainly hoping for the best with Wonder Woman and Justice League coming up, but if those happen to not be good, what idiot is it going to take for someone at Warner Brothers to wake up and go, hey, the TV guys seem to get it. Yeah. And everyone seems to love what they're doing. Why not we let them do it the way, X-Files graduated and made a couple movies and stuff at the very least. Well, I don't know. At this point, I'm like, what's keeping you guys?
I mean, and I can't speak for DC. I'm certainly, I don't have any inside knowledge or anything. But I feel like I can completely understand why, how their tone has evolved in their film division. In part because, when you've come out after Marvel. And Marvel, in certain ways, Marvel has sort of taken up that aesthetic that I would have traditionally associated with DC, sort of that brighter, sunnier,
more positive universe.
Positive universe that doesn't have kind of the cynicism and neuroses that you might expect out of a traditional Marvel book. And
sure.
I think DC kind of coming off the heels of that, they don't want to. I can imagine they wouldn't want to repeat what Marvel has already done to great success, because they don't want to be accused of sort of biting Marvel's style. And on top of that, they had such a financial and critical success with the Chris Nolan movies. That,
right. I think it's even more so that the Nolan movies kind of dictated the pace more, regardless of what Marvel was doing. But go on.
Yeah. And I think with those combined, I'm sure if Chris Nolan would have been willing to do all of the Justice League movies, I'm sure Warner's would have been thrilled to do it. But in lieu of him doing that, I'm sure they felt that Zack Snyder was sort of the next best choice in terms of
Goyer too, working on the Nolan films and everything.
For
but
sure.
Go on, I don't mean to. Forgive me, man. I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, not at all. And I think with all that, I think I can totally understand sort of, it's, and I say this with no denigration. It's sort of, it's a Pepsi Coke scenario, or to go back to Riverdale, a Betty and Veronica situation. And so I think, DC's tone is in part, a reaction to its prior successes. And, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And also, a reaction of, we're going to be our own thing. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how Wonder Woman and Justice League turn out, because I think in their own ways, they're very important movies. I think.
Go on. Why are they? You answer why they're very important movies.
Well, I feel like Wonder Woman, in particular, it's a female-led superhero movie, and I feel like while I've said that I think as an industry we've made some steps forward, I think that's something that we have, but we're still very much lacking. I think having like female protagonists in our movies and our books, I think we still have a very long way to go. And Wonder Woman's she's a cultural icon, and I think and I can only imagine I'm sure that the powers that be over at DC, I'm sure they recognize that this is a very big deal, and this is a character that is, she's an icon around the world. I think there are a lot of people all around the world who might not know what the word feminism really means, but they know what Wonder Woman means.
Sure.
And so I think, as an icon around the world, I think I think they all know it's very important to stick the landing on it. And as far as Justice League goes, it's, I think Batman v Superman in that regard was sort of the trial run. It was, we're going to have two big icons sharing the screen together. And listen, I love Avengers. I love that movie. That first one I probably saw in theaters a half dozen times. But,
sure.
So, outside of like the comics reading crowd, I wouldn't consider them to have been like major cultural icons sharing the screen at the same time. They've since become that because of the success of the Avengers movies and all the sort of satellite films. But everybody knows who Batman is. Everybody knows who Superman is. Everybody knows who Wonder Woman is. Everybody knows who the Flash is. And sort of, even the people who make jokes about Aquaman, they all know who Aquaman is.
Sure.
And so having all of them on the screen together and using this as an opportunity to really flesh out and define these characters for a new generation. I mean, you see how Robert Downey Jr. sort of tweaked the character of Tony Stark. And, now he's sort of seen as he's Tony Snark. And
yep.
I feel like this is DC's opportunity to do that across the board. This is their opportunity to make, to turn Aquaman from being, kind of this, kind of a joke, unfortunately, to, now he's like this big strapping dude. Like, he's awesome. I mean, don't tell this guy he can talk to fish. I mean, it is. I think these two movies are they're opportunities, and I think they're almost it's almost like an ambassadorship to the greater cultural community. It's saying these are our characters, this is who they are, this is who they stand for, and I think if DC can really sell this and stick the landing, that's what's going to sort of keep their cultural relevance afloat.
Well, I agree. I agree with everything you said.
Yeah.
All I can say is, even if it's a shit movie,
Yep.
it's at best, or at worst, I should say,
Yep.
a 2-year problem, maybe a 3-year problem.
No,
and that seems like an eternity, but it's a blink, as you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that's because honestly, and that's my only comment, because when people say that, I'm like, no, I agree with all of that, but I also think that even if it sucks, okay, in 2 or 3 years they'll fix it.
Yeah.
Because that's how easily it is to fix this stuff.
Well, these characters, they're evergreen, and you've seen it over at Sony and Fox, where you have Spider-Man and X-Men. They're going through all these new iterations, and even, I mean, Daredevil, which I feel like, we saw a not particularly great film version of it, and then we saw Netflix salvage the brand only a few years later.
Exactly. And the only reason why it took so long was Fox was still holding on to it and trying to figure. Who knows how actively they were trying to figure out what to do.
Yep. And
I mean, we heard development, plans, but who knows? So yeah.
And I think going back to your original point is sort of the difference between the Snyderverse and the Berlantiverse is I think that speaks to sort of the elasticity and versatility of these characters. Is that you can have a show like The Flash, which I love that show. It's probably one of my favorite shows on television. The fact that you can have Barry Allen on the CW show, and I think he shares more than a little bit in common with, say, Peter Parker, versus Ezra Miller's take on the Flash, which is he's like, that's a deeply weird dude. I mean, he's somebody who I think is going to play really well in the context of that Justice League. And I think, it speaks to, how enduring these characters are, that you can have these sort of, these parallel characterizations, and I feel like there's going to be a market for it.
Did someone go from Newsarama to that Justice League junket in England? Did
I am not sure. I don't believe so, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I was wondering. Yeah, no worries. I was wondering, and actually it was me fishing, as I wasn't sure if you went or not, because your, whatever insight you have on Ezra's portrayal of the Flash and stuff. I mean, really, all we gotten were the trailers, and really that Bruce Flash trailer scene was so much the Tony Stark Peter Parker scene.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, and to almost an embarrassing level of, all right, really. Jesus. Again, Spencer and Locke can feel very comfortable on the right side of homage and parody compared to the Justice League lifting of the Peter and Tony scene. Those are my. All right, and I should ask, pop quiz.
Yeah.
All right, yay or nay? I'm going to give you a list of the DC movies, and you tell me. Man of Steel, yay or nay? You got to pick yay or nay. No middle.
That's a nay.
Okay, and I'll say it's barely over the nay side. I liked a lot of it, but ultimately nay. So then, all right, and then after that, obviously, what do we got? Batman, just Batman v Superman. So yay or nay?
Nay. 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 No, right, less nay than Man of Steel, but nay.
Okay. Suicide Squad. Yay or nay? And again, nay. All right.
Sorry.
There you go. Yeah, I was just wondering. Yeah, hey man, it's okay. I mean, there's maybe 51% of the audience that likes Suicide Squad. I don't know.
I feel
that's what cracks me up.
This comes back to me, being, a process guy and a critic is, and I do this with every bit of film and television that I watch, is I will always watch it and sort of pick it apart structurally. Structure is kind of like my big thing. I'm like very much a structure snob, and sort of seeing, I'm like, there are different ways that you can sort of make the storytelling equation balance differently to make it actually sort of tell the sorts of story and the kinds of emotion that you want it to. And there was a lot of nits to pick, let me say. I think Suicide Squad, I think there was, people had talked about sort of the contentious editing process behind that. And I think you could definitely see that. And same thing for Batman v Superman. I feel like that's certainly a movie that I'm sure there were a lot of great components that were there, and I'm sure some of them kind of were left on the cutting room floor. Man of Steel is really the only one of the three that I kind of felt strongly about on a more of a philosophical basis. My philosophy is I love Superman. I think he's a great character. This comes from having been a reporter who grew up in the Midwest.
Sure.
And to sort of equate him with 9/11, kind of felt like it was opposite of everything that I sort of see Superman as. I see Superman as very inspirational, endearing character that people just kind of naturally like. He's that guy from your high school that everybody loves, and then when you come back and you see him at the reunion, everybody still loves him, and not because he's like a jerk, but just because he's like a genuinely great dude.
Yep.
And so, sort of that.
I
think that was what kind of rubbed me the wrong way when I saw Man of Steel the first time, is because it didn't really have any of those qualities. It was tough for me to really kind of root for these characters or really like them or really even relate to them. So anybody who wants to see Man of Steel, I always recommend that they read Mark Waid's Superman Birthright instead.
Oh, that's interesting. Sure. Yeah, and you're right. And it is, as I always forget, a better version of kind of the basic story. You're right about that. My thing, and I know my listeners are sick of me hearing me say it, but quickly, it's everything you said is right. And the reasons why our Clark Kent is the most popular guy in high school and the most popular guy at the reunion, or at least a guy that we all like, is because of his parents.
Yep.
And What I mean, God, again, maybe they would have been better as Locke's parents. Although, don't talk about your stuffed animal.
No. Trust me.
Don't let people know.
Locke's parents are. I think.
Well, yeah, we do see a little bit of that in the beginning.
They are bad news.
That's true.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, and I think Superman as a character, I think part of the reason why he's endured for so long is because he really does speak to so many different themes. And I think Ma and Pa Kent are really, they're the messengers for that. Because anytime you want to tell a story about Superman, whether it's talking about, I don't know, tolerance or talking about, reaching out to others or talking about, strength that is different than just muscle and bone, but something moral.
Strength and character, yeah. Moral.
These are all lessons that you can pass down from Ma and Pa Kent.
Yep.
And
again, that scene where Jonathan dies, and or even before that, is just that there wasn't enough of the Kents helping other people.
Yes, I agree.
The Kents seem to want to again not be bothered and kind of leave us alone, and certainly don't ask us about our adopted son. And and it was just so weird, and that's the man was missing from Superman in Man of Steel, and the other thing that bothers me about Batman v Superman, obviously, is the extended cut does make more sense, and as you say, obviously was left on the cutting room floor for the theatrical release.
Sure.
And when the extended cut is a better storytelling of the plot than the theatrical thing, you've got a problem,
right?
And really, I hope that the bigwigs at Warner's did hear all of us say, well, that makes more sense.
Right.
Because it isn't like the other DVDs where we're getting added scenes.
Right.
My closest comparison is another movie that kind of screwed the pooch in the same way is Star Trek Nemesis 15 years ago. Because of the same thing. And it's funny because you hear on the DVD Stuart Baird, the director, say, oh, we didn't need this scene. We didn't need this scene. It's like, yeah, actually you did.
Right.
Because it explained things much more clearly. And, God, I mean, what the alternate ending, all people have to do is look on YouTube for that and watch that extended scene that they left out of Star Trek. And it's like, you would have felt much better about the movie the way that it ends in this alternate ending than the way it does in the film. And
I think part of, for me personally, I think part of the reason why I didn't connect with Batman v Superman in the way that I wanted to, I think it all comes down to, and this is, I think, the deal with Spencer and Locke as well, is the question is this a character-driven story or is it a plot-driven story? And I think had Batman v Superman sort of started from this core of these are two very, very different characters. How do they coexist in the same world? Just their temperament, their personality, their methods of doing business, and how do those things bring you into conflict with one another? As opposed to sort of it's really Batman v Superman. Its overarching plot is it's the aftermath of the Battle of Metropolis, and it's sort of Batman reacting to something that happened in a previous movie. And so he's sort of a very active character. He says, I'm taking my revenge on Superman for something that happened in the last movie. And Superman's a little bit more of a reactive, he's sort of, what's my role in the world after, the Battle of Metropolis? But that doesn't really make for a particularly energetic co-lead. And honestly, if this is supposed to be a movie that's sort of a clash of philosophies, it doesn't really sell Clark's side of the argument very well. And I think ultimately, and plug, that's sort of going back to Spencer and Locke a little bit, is, yes, we have a lot of plot, and we have a lot of, action sequences, but ultimately I think the core of our story is it's these two characters and their past with one another and how they interact with one another in the present. And I think it's when you have, I think that's the thing. That's the reason why DC and Marvel, they've lasted as long as they have, is that they have these characters that are so enduring and iconic, and yet they're so mutable in the way that you can really, you can afford to take different angles on their characterization, and they often still feel true. I think it's just, you have to figure out what your angle is going to be on these characters and then really commit to it. Because without that characterization, it becomes, people punching each other. And I think people get numb of that after a while.
What do you think of, all right, and quickly to wrap up the movie talk, because I do want to hear what you think of what's going on at DC and Marvel Publishing currently. What are you looking forward to this year, movie-wise?
Oh, well, I was fortunate enough to see the first 42 minutes of Logan.
Oh, wow, great. And, tell me about it.
It's going to be
spoiler-free, of course.
It's going to be fantastic. I saw it over at Fox for a press event in December, and I was blown away.
That's great to hear.
I have not been a tremendous fan of the first two Wolverine movies.
Sure.
And this is, going back to the talk of the execution, it's the execution in this movie looks spectacular. And granted, this movie may very well kind of screw the pooch after 42 minutes. I don't know. But I can say, starting off, Hugh Jackman is really fantastic, and I feel like he's I think he's channeling his inner Clint Eastwood a little bit with this. I think there's a lot of showing and less telling. And Patrick Stewart, talk about subverting expectations. You haven't lived until you watch Patrick Stewart drop an F-bomb. And I think that's going to be really spectacular, and I'm very excited to see Lego Batman. I've got my tickets for Thursday.
Me too. Me too.
I love the Lego Movie, and I thought Batman was such a great part of it. And listen, when you love comics, and I'm sure you feel the same way, when you love comics for as long as we have, you start to love it from all sorts of different angles, including making fun of it. And
of course.
And so watching this, watching Warner Brothers and DC kind of poke fun at themselves with this, I literally just can't wait. And
man,
Guardians 2, I'm very excited about that.
Sure.
Just watched the new commercial over at the Super Bowl, and my girlfriend had an actual like physical and verbal reaction seeing Baby Groot. So.
Very nice.
I'm very excited to see that going. Yeah, he comes on the screen and I just hear ooh.
That's hilarious.
I'm very excited for all those, and I'm very excited for Wonder Woman and Justice League. Wonder Woman especially. The thing I'm very curious about. I think a superhero period movie, that's a tough thing to do. I'm one of those contrarians where the first Cap movie was not particularly my cup of tea, and I feel like that movie in part is because we know Cap is going to be in the future, so this just kind of felt like an extended detour. Whereas this,
interesting. Dave, let me ask you real fast. How old are you?
I'm 30. I'm going to be 31.
Okay, go on. All right, no worries. Go on. And all good.
I feel like
no judgment.
I feel like Wonder Woman. I think in part because of that more serious tone, I'm very curious. I feel like they're going to commit to the period more. I think it's going to feel campy is not the right word, and I don't want people to jump on me for using it. But I think it's that I think that serious tone is going to help a lot more sell the period setting. Whereas I think Cap 1 felt so kind of bright and peppy, and it didn't quite feel as focused or deliberate with certain bits of the execution.
It dropped, as you said, as for Justice League. So start off with as for
Justice League. I've been hurt before by trailers, so I don't want to commit too hard to it. But from what little I've seen, I'm very excited. The fact that they've done such divergent takes on Aquaman and the Flash. That alone I'm very excited about because, look, part of what I think DC needs moving forward, and I think Jeff Johns really did this very well with his Green Lantern run, but giving these characters a strong point of view.
Sure.
And I feel like right now, if you ask who's Aquaman,
What is his? What's his
personality trait?
Yeah, what's his perspective and everything? Definitely, agree.
Whereas Hal, you think of Hal, and he is reckless and self-confident to an extreme. He's basically Captain Kirk in the J.J. Abrams Star Trek. That's
funny.
Or he's Tom Cruise in Top Gun.
That's very good. Absolutely, definitely the Top Gun influence and everything. But no, I like the Chris Pine Captain Kirk. That's very good.
Definitely. I mean, when I saw that Star Trek movie, that was the first thing I thought is, he's Hal Jordan.
Hilarious. And the funny thing is, as an older reader, I always point out it's like, Hal Jordan and Matt Murdock come from the same place, but for different reasons. They are born without fear. They are the men without fear.
You're the first person that I've talked with besides me who's thought that.
Attaboy.
I mean, if they ever did another Marvel versus DC crossover, I've always said I really want to do Green Lantern, Daredevil, the Men Without Fear.
Yep.
Because they come from the same place, but two very different, journeys.
Yep.
And I think if DC can do that for all of its characters, I think that's the sort of storytelling for me. It's very attractive because, these characters, this is part of the reason why I love superheroes so much, is that, once you get past the powers and the costumes, which are great fun, they're metaphors.
Sure, of course.
And,
of course.
Spider-Man is, with great power comes great responsibility. Or, Batman is about taking pain and channeling it into something good, which I think is sort of a theme of Spencer and Locke as well. And I think, being able to sort of, I think DC has done this, taken steps to doing this with DC Rebirth, is once you dig into the actual characterization and you figure out what qualities make these characters tick, then readers start to fall in love with them again. And readers start to be able to empathize with who they are. Because after a while, a death ray of the week, people, that's not really a relatable problem. That's not something that people can really wrap their heads around. But, having to ask a girl out at your place of work, or, having your heart broken, or dealing with, the mistakes of your past, these are all things every single person can relate to that.
I would agree with all of that. And I think, to be honest, I think even the New 52 still had the essence of the characters, but it was without the backstory that we all had been following. They ripped the soap opera away from us and said, "Oh no, we've got a new soap opera for you." And it's like, yeah, fuck you. We've invested. Well, for real, because it really was like, I don't need Barry and Iris meeting each other again. Thank you, or whatever, and certainly. God, Lois and Clark, don't even get me started. Jesus Christ. I mean, that was just, it was just stupid. It's like, again, it's like you can't treat them as brand new, as brand new as you've made them. And I think, honestly, the key was in what Jeff did with Rebirth, and the whole conceit of Rebirth is we used to have a past. It was taken away from us. What happened and why? And we need to get that back. And it's like, shit. Do that.
Yeah, I think the way Jeff did it was I thought it was a nice little bit of meta text.
Of course.
And and the fact that you have ostensibly the Watchmen characters as the villains of the piece, although I still think it's a little too pat. I don't know
see what he does with it. I'm with you too, man. But it's like I'm always like, all right, tell your story, and then we'll see how it goes. Because forgive me, but that's the one thing about comic criticism. So many times, because these stories are 5 parts, and sometimes, as you would know as a process guy, chapter 2 sometimes is a what the fuck moment of, wait a minute, what's going on? This isn't right. This isn't, and it's like, that's the reaction they want you to have. They also want you to come back for the rest of the story. And again, that's what each story is kind of weighed on. So no, believe me, I know. And I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, and obviously with Watchmen, that cuts so deep in so many different ways, and it's been a fascinating subject of discussion since before Watchmen was announced.
Yep.
So I agree with all that. But it's like, all right, let's yay or nay. Before Watchmen, there were some stories that I honestly thought they did quite well.
Yeah.
but it also, cuts on the whole, but you kind of are, going against the wishes of the creators and stuff, or certainly at least Alan. Dave seems to be cool about it, or at least tacitly cool about as much as he can in terms of, all right, well, you guys own the characters. I'm going to, take the best of this and move on.
It's the ultimate audacious move, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think when I first read the book, I was fortunate enough that I got to read it in advance, and I remember putting it down, and I was like, no way.
Oh, reading Rebirth in advance?
Yeah, because it's such an audacious move.
Yeah.
And again, I'm the one who put Calvin and Hobbes in Sin City, so I guess I'm not one to talk. But I think it's certainly going to shake people up, and it's certainly going to get people to pay attention because it's I think so much of what superhero comics are struggling with these days is they want to find the right villain. They want to find the right obstacles and antagonists for heroes to come up against. And that's why it's become so in vogue for heroes to fight other heroes, is because it's gotten to the point where these villains no longer have the cachet, by and large, to really pose like a credible threat to heroes.
Sure.
But suddenly you pit, Captain America against Iron Man, and suddenly you're like, oh, that's unstoppable force meets immovable object. Let's see what happens. And I think Watchmen, like you said, it's a move designed to press buttons for sure, and it's the one sort of uncharted territory for DC Comics these days, because they've done add-ons for Sandman, or and I don't think V for Vendetta is quite a big enough draw, but Watchmen, the thing that the series that both deconstructed superhero comics, but has also been like a high point for superhero storytelling over the last 30 years.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's an appropriate feeling huge adversary to overcome. And I think, like you said, I think people are rightly debating about, well, what's the ethics of using what is ostensibly a creator-driven, book that the creator has made it very clear he doesn't want to continue.
Yeah.
I feel like it's like you said, it's so up in the air right now, and I feel like there are going to be plenty of people who say it doesn't matter what the story is, it's not justified. And there's going to be other people who say this is a story that can only be told with the Watchmen characters. I don't know where I fall in that debate, to be quite honest. I mean, I would hope that whatever's done is done with respect to the creators.
Yeah. I
don't know if there's an answer of how one can do that.
Well, again, it's theirs to do with what they will, and it's Walt Disney faced the same problem back in the 30s, and I think through the 40s with Oswald Rabbit, creating it and having to let it go. And obviously, luckily, he had immediate success with Mickey, so I'm sure it didn't hurt that bad. But I mean, that is the truth, is that these are owned by DC to do with what they want, and the very audaciousness of putting them in the DC universe is going to cause interest and obviously sales, and it's going to be a big thing. We'll see what happens. Have you talked about Dark Knight 3 at all? What are your thoughts on Dark Knight 3?
Oh, well, okay. So, here's the thing. I think Frank Miller has forgotten more about how to make comics than I'll ever know. And I feel like Frank when I was a kid, I remember my mom getting me the single issue collections of Daredevil, the Man Without Fear.
Yep.
And I remember very clearly my 8-year-old brain just like exploded. I feel like that was at that moment I realized, people write these books. Like, they don't just come out of thin air. And it was because of Frank's voice. And I thought, I want to read more with this voice. And so I started reading Dark Knight Returns, Batman Year One. I eventually got into Sin City, 300. And, I feel like Frank has such an unmistakable and iconic voice. And I think he is at his best when allowed to do his own thing. And I think in certain ways, Dark Knight 3 is kind of, it's microcosm of how do you make comics in what is considered an editorially driven environment.
Right.
And I think, in part, Frank has a co-writer,
yes.
Brian Azzarello.
Yep.
And I think, and the fact that Frank is not able to draw his own, he's drawn some of the mini comics in the back, which I've actually found to be more engaging than the main story.
I agree with that.
But
too.
I feel like this, it's trying to have your cake and eating it too, in that you want to have Frank Miller, but you also want to have this sort of big, sprawling Justice League story. And the thing is, Frank has already written that. Frank wrote that with DK2.
Yep.
And it's hard to call it a true Dark Knight story without having Frank Miller art, because Frank is the kind of craftsman that he was able to take panel layouts and really use that to shape the pace and tempo of his story.
Right. Whereas
you can have the most talented artist on that book, but it's not Frank, and it's very difficult. There's a reason why Frank Miller is one of a kind. So
that's interesting. Because didn't Klaus? I thought. Well, I thought Klaus had a more active role certainly in the first book.
Sure, absolutely, and it's funny.
But that's what I'm saying. Klaus, I think he's still. I hear what you're saying, that Kubert and Klaus aren't Frank and Klaus. But I get what you're saying. Go on, please.
Well, it's funny because I feel like Klaus really, especially for that first book, he was the one who sort of he gave Frank was the bones of the house. And Klaus really kind of gave it that spit polish, that
yes.
really kind of and I feel like, Cuberts are a different thing. It's just an entirely different animal now. And I think in part also it's, the original Dark Knight books were, I think the issues were 44 pages, 48 pages?
I think
something
48.
Like that.
I'm pretty sure 48.
48. Whereas these issues are coming out in batches of, I think, 20 or 22 pages. And I think that alone is a very big stumbling block for this book, because suddenly you have to sort of break up the story piecemeal instead of sort of going for these longer extended sequences that can really pack a punch because you're getting in one sitting. Whereas now, you have these Kryptonians flying around, but you have to cut up the battle into 2 or 3 parts. And I think that sort of that release schedule, it's tough. And I think ultimately, that's a high bar. You're evoking Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. Depending on who you talk to, it's either the best Batman story of all time or it's the second best.
No, I would agree with you. Yeah.
And so,
see, that's where I can't yay or nay in terms of which one, Watchmen or Dark Knight, because I'm old enough to remember when they both came out and stuff, and it was like, what are you talking about? It was like this honeymoon that never ended, because it was Dark Knight was great and Watchmen was excellent right behind it and everything, and it's like, oh, that was a great year and a half, however long it took for all 12 issues of Watchmen and 4 issues of Dark Knight to come out. Oh my God, yeah.
And so when you evoke that name, and I feel this way a lot with Spencer and Locke, with the inspirations that we've drawn from, is you don't use Frank Miller's name in vain. And I feel like if you're gonna use the Dark Knight name, you better come prepared. And I feel like, I know they've said there's a 4th one in the works, and I from what I've
Frank
heard,
said it. Yeah,
well, from what I've heard, it sounds like Frank's going to be more involved with that 4th one.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm very curious how it turns out. I think lately, Frank's sort of modern day work has not been, it whether it's due to politics or whether it's due to sort of his evolving style, hasn't been for me. But at the same time, like the man doesn't have to prove anything to anybody, in my opinion. I think he has come up with so much, just astonishingly excellent and revolutionary work that I'll always look back at those books, and I will always credit those to the reason I'm a comics fan today.
Sure.
But as for sort of the present day Dark Knight 3, it's not for me personally. I can see where others would really like it, just based on the names and talents involved. Just for me, I think there's an expectation of something else when you use that name and when you have Frank Miller involved in a project. And so for me, it hasn't really hit that bar.
All right. No, I respect that. What was I going to say? Oh, well, I should, before we get to Marvel, because we've talked a lot about Frank Miller as an inspiration to you, and not a lot about Bill Watterson.
Yeah.
So
Bill Watterson.
Well,
no, I mean, listen, the guy. Bill Watterson's a master, and it's one of those things. I feel like even before I really started reading comics as a kid, I remember. My mother's a college professor, and I remember she would have Calvin and Hobbes strips all around her office. And reading Calvin and Hobbes as a kid, I mean, I was spoiled. I did not know how good I had it. I think I grew up thinking all comic strips would be that good. And no, that's not it at all. And it's only when I got older and I started revisiting my Calvin and Hobbes books that I realized that, the level of craftsmanship that went into Calvin and Hobbes, and the thoughtfulness, and just sort of, he's so good he makes it seem effortless, which is, I mean, I can tell you,
to do it with 4 daily panels.
Yes, and
I mean, not to mention the Sundays, but really to get some an emotion the way Charles Schultz did. I mean, again, you can pretty much count them on maybe 2 hands. Those kinds of Walt Kelly is another person like that. Go on.
Yeah, and it was just as a writer. I mean, for me, writing. I don't go in like writing jags. Like I have to really sit and think and consider. And unless I've got like a real strong idea that kind of flips in my head, it's a step-by-step process, which, rereading the Calvin and Hobbes strips for this book, I was like, oh, kill me. Like, I'm not even going to be like good enough to lick this man's boots. And so evoking his greatest creation is a total act of hubris on my part. But I think Bill Watterson, because he had repetition and because he had this daily platform, I think that meant he was able to get inside his characters' heads so well and really kind of explore their voices and their points of view in so many different settings. And just the sheer imagination he brought to it. The fact that Bill Watterson was able to throw in Spaceman Spiff, he was able to throw in dinosaurs, he was able to throw in the killer bike, he was able to throw in the doctor who he's like, Calvin's threatening to stab him with a tongue dispenser. All these different characters. The fact that he was able to take, these sorts of mundane, everyday things and just elevate them to this larger than life level. It was incredibly inspirational, and I think it really instilled in me sort of this idea of a good property and a good premise. It has an elasticity to it, and you can take it in a lot of different directions, and it'll still sort of snap back like a rubber band. And I think it's one of those things. I'm sure I'll be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life now that I'm doing a book like Spencer and Locke. But Bill and Frank, I mean, we do this purely out of love. I mean, this is these guys were just so talented that they inspired us to really kind of try to do something different.
Very cool, man. No, and like I said before, and I mean it, You stay on the right side of homage, so that's good. All right, so what's wrong with Marvel?
Oh no. Well,
the essay question.
I think. Oh man. Well, Marvel. I think Marvel's definitely kind of finding themselves at the moment. I think post Secret Wars, sure. I think they had a very ambitious concept on their hands that I don't think was quite as accessible as it needed to be. I think they were trying to kind of beat DC at their own game by having sort of a crisis style event. And, the problem is, doing sort of what they did for the Age of Apocalypse way back when, which I love that series, by the way. But I think sort of removing all of their books for an extended period to tell sort of these not quite Elseworlds tales, I think the brand is still kind of catching up a little bit.
So Secret Wars, you think even?
Yeah, for sure. And I think between that and Civil War II kind of coming on the heels of it, I think the original Civil War, it certainly had flaws, but I think its overall premise was grounded nicely in characterization, and you can see the overarching theme of, Steve Rogers versus Tony Stark. They're both very different in terms of how they do business. They're very different in terms of their personalities. And so that sort of made the whole story work. I think Captain Marvel is not quite as defined as a character yet for Marvel. I feel like she is an important character for Marvel, and I think she's one that Marvel has clearly sort of thrown their weight behind. But I think she's not quite Iron Man level yet, and so trying to pit the two of them against one another. And I think there was, I think Brian Michael Bendis, to his credit, I think he tried to put in a nice theme of sort of, privacy versus security. And in this case, it was this pre-crime kind of thesis. I just think that the overall execution and structure didn't quite grab me, and I think it did kind of. I think Marvel readers are certainly, from what I've been hearing, they've been responding, and not necessarily in the most positive way. But I think Marvel. There are certainly. I mean, the advantage for Marvel, and this goes back to what about the DC movies, is that because they don't make a big show out of rebooting and relaunching. Or I should say, they don't make a big show out of rebooting. They certainly do enough number ones, but
who doesn't make a big deal about rebooting?
Marvel.
Marvel, go on.
Yeah,
as you just said about number ones, I agree.
They do plenty of relaunches, but it's never anything continuity wise. It's never anything particular about the characters. I mean, every so often you'll get a little bit of a tweak in characterization, like the way that David Walker did with Luke Cage over in Power Man and Iron Fist, where now he's like a little bit more of like a cuddlier, dad figure. But I feel like you said about the DC movies, because Marvel doesn't make a big show about rebooting and they don't make a huge show about their continuity, it's a temporary problem. I think they do have the seeds for their success, and they're more character-driven books. I think Dennis Hopeless, I have to say, for me, he's the writer to watch over at Marvel. I think
I like your pick. I'm a big fan. Dennis is a friend, and we've started like 3 word balloons, and technical difficulties have kept them from going on the air. And then suddenly I'll look up and go, you haven't talked to Dennis in a year, and I'm like, oh shit. Let me get Dennis on. My God.
His work on
he's a smart dude.
His work on Spider-Woman has been really strong, and honestly, I love his work on All New X-Men. I think it's such a humane way to look at these teen characters, particularly Iceman and his coming out story. And I feel like he is an up and comer. I think Al Ewing is really strong. He reminds me a lot. I think he reminds me a lot of Dan Slott and Jeff Johns back in like the mid 2000s.
Oh, that's great. That's high praise. I think you're right. That's
he's got a real strong sense of continuity, and he's able to sort of use these bits and pieces for the Marvel universe to really great effect. And I think Mark Waid is doing some really fun stuff over on Champions, which, cool. I think that book, I think, represents a lot of the promise of the Marvel universe right now. Sort of seeing these teenage heroes, and Marvel has tried this, with a great deal of success in the past with its 2 Young Avengers runs. I think this is a nice spiritual successor to those. It's a little bit more meat and potatoes superhero, but I think it's still got that kind of youthful idealism. And so I know Wade in recent issues has been trying to sort of go a little bit more topical with these characters in terms of the sorts of threats that they fight. And excuse me.
He had said that. Said that with the direction for the book, and I think you're right. After the initial start, now he's really kind of focusing in on that. So and I wonder. I don't mean. Go ahead if you want.
No.
Continue to praise a few more things.
I was going to say it's these sort of character-driven books. I mean, it's funny. We say we look to the youth for our future, and I think it's Marvel's teen books. It's Nova, which is fantastic. Been really digging the new run on that, and then obviously Miss Marvel, which I think at this point is about as flagship of a book for Marvel as it gets. And even Spider-Gwen over in the alternate universe. I mean, it's those characters. Yeah, it's those characters. It's those books that they're more character driven than premise driven. And I think it's those sorts of books. I think once Marvel sort of shakes off the last of the continuity stuff with the fallout of Civil War II, and they focus on, well, why do we like these characters, and what about these characters? Why do we fall in love with them? I think that's when you get to, and you'll get to you see that in the Marvel movies. I mean, they go out of their way to make us like their characters, and I think the more the books can do that, the better off the company's going to be.
I hear you. I wonder with Civil War II, and I look forward to talking to Brian about this soon. Because you make a good point in terms of maybe that Captain Marvel wasn't ready to represent that side as the point person.
Right.
I wonder if much like what Johns did with Blackest Night, where all of a sudden Batman and Superman were not at the center of an event, that maybe there needed to be someone else on really Captain Marvel's level. Because I agree with you. I think that there is clearly there's room for growth and excitement behind Captain Marvel, and I don't mean to denigrate the character in any way, because I think what's been going on with Captain Marvel since I liked even Brian Reed's run, but really even obviously starting with Kelly Sue and what G. Willow Wilson has done and everyone else since, it's a great positive run. But I don't know if she is ready to be the alpha in an event like that. And maybe if she were matched with, and I can't think of who might work on that same level, but some other character, be it male or female, that is also on that kind of trajectory and everything.
I'd say Scarlet
Witch. Okay. That's all right. Although that's interesting. That's very interesting from a story standpoint because, now would she be a fatalist? And because the other thing I was going to say is I almost wonder if the argument side should have been switched and Tony should have been the one to side with the precog and say, hey, I've been on this carnival ride since the start of the Marvel Universe. Yep. If we've got a way of stopping this shit, I'm for it. Yep. Where obviously Carol, as a younger hero, would be like, what are you talking about? Nothing's set.
Yep.
So maybe that would have been better.
With you on that one. And I think if you had done, Carol alongside somebody like Scarlet Witch can say, listen, I've been through the worst of it and I've come out the other side. Who are you to stop somebody from living their life and changing their life when you've already predetermined it for them?
Yeah.
So
I don't know. And I agree with you on the number ones. I mean, it's a mess, and unfortunately, with when events go late, it only gets worse. And a friend of mine is like, "Can you believe they're going to make this comic that's going to explain where all the continuity is and everything?" And I'm like, Yeah, didn't they do that with Marvel Age? I go, this is nothing new. I'm like, whatever. I go, whatever they can do to fix the ship. But this just, to me, it's like, would you assholes please stop doing number ones? I swear on my show, Dave. It's okay.
No.
But really, it's like, it's frustrating. And it's like, hey, just... it's the fall of Doctor Doom 1 through 6, and the next story is Doc Ock's Revenge 1 through 6. Go to that. Do the Dark Horse thing, and by all means celebrate your anniversaries and keep track of the numbering. And you know what, the 900th issue is coming up. Absolutely, do a 900th issue. But other than that, it's fucking meaningless.
Well, I think it's so much tougher to do these days because, and this is in part because books, now they double ship. And so I think it's much harder to keep a cohesive creative team together. And I know, Steve Wacker was really good at this when he was working on the Spider-Man books. He was really good at this on Daredevil. And DC is figuring this out as well over its double shipping and Rebirth, is that, it's tough because you have to plan this very far in advance. And oftentimes writers will have to write books even out of sequence, write issues out of sequence in order to accommodate for their various art teams. But I think it winds up because it's harder to have a more stable creative team, particularly in terms of the art, that I think it's much harder to sort of get that track record going to really build up to these big anniversary issues like you're talking about. Because for every writer out there who has a landmark long run in a book, like Dan Slott on Spider-Man, Jeff Johns on Green Lantern, Grant Morrison on Batman or X-Men or JLA, you have plenty of other books where the art team might not be consistent. It might not even be consistent in terms of style. And unless you're really writing to account for that, I feel like this is sort of a big throwback, but Will Moss was the editor on Thunder Agents when Nick Spencer wrote it. And what he did, and I thought it was very interesting, was Nick wrote his scripts with the idea that there were going to be guest artists coming in. And so with that in mind, you were able to the reader would sort of understand, this is the reason why the art is switching mid-issue, but it makes sense from a story perspective, as opposed to, telling a six-part story where you're going to have 2 or 3 different artists and they're going to be alternating from issue to issue. That's a little tougher to sustain on the long term. And I think it's a little bit of a reaction to we've lived so long where books have been writer driven, and it's not to say writers aren't important. I don't want to put myself on the job, but I think comics are just as based on their art as they are in their scripting.
Sure.
And if you can, and I think that's going to be the big challenge for the big two, is figuring out a way to sort of have a consistent art style, whether that's having sort of complementary artists with similar styles, or being able to sort of front load arcs well in advance, which is a tough thing to do in a bi-weekly shipping schedule.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I think once the art teams are as consistent as the writer teams, or something at least somewhat resembling that, I think that's when the market will be a little bit more inviting towards longer runs, as opposed to what winds up happening. It happens at Marvel, but it happened during the New 52 era at DC as well, where books start hitting a certain threshold of low sales, and you could either keep going with the same creative team, even if it's kind of to diminishing returns, or you cancel it and put a new number 1 on it, sometimes with a new creative team, sometimes without, which I feel is a little. I feel like that's a little shady in my opinion. Like that's sort of the challenges that I think these companies are facing, especially with sort of these. I can't even really call them mid-tier books anymore, because the levels of attrition are such that they can only go a few issues before they need to start rethinking things immediately.
It'll be interesting how it shakes out, but it's I agree with you that ultimately too Marvel will write its own ship as far as that goes, but
yeah. And I think, it's been interesting. I mean, going back a little bit, because we only talked about DC Rebirth a little bit, but I think, DC is doing that on a conceptual basis. I think they're trying to and I think to mostly success, writing the ship in terms of bringing everything back to the characters. I think now their big challenge, and it makes sense having come from where they've come from. Now that they've sort of got their characters a little bit more fleshed out, now it's a matter of sort of getting the art as consistent as the writing, and I think they are, they've got a tough scheduling thing to figure out. But you see books like Detective Comics, for example, James Tynion and Eddie Barrows. I mean, like Eddie Barrows.
Who's Eddie's alternate?
Eddie's alternate is Alvaro. I gotta look this up.
Because I immediately thought of, as you're looking
Alvaro,
it up,
his name's Alvaro Martinez.
Okay.
And the thing is Eddie and Alvaro, their styles are not particularly similar, but the way that they've done it is they've alternated the schedules as such where you're not really losing Eddie when like he's in the middle of something big. They've always sort of given him that chance to breathe, and then when there's like a good moment to switch the two, they do. And because both artists are so strong with their individual artistic voices, it works.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Because I was going to say Tom King with Finch, and recently we had Mitch Gerdes, and I forget who Tom's Finch's other alternate was.
He had Mikhail Janin.
Of course, yes. Thank you.
And you know what? Like that's the thing is I think DC and DC is really catching up to Marvel in that regard, because Marvel for the longest time was it wasn't just enough that they were going toe to toe with DC in terms of getting A-list writing caliber. Yeah. But Marvel seemingly was really kind of like stockpiling all these like very very unmistakable artists, like people who are had a really strong style, and I think DC is starting to really sort of fight back with that. I saw that they had I saw that they had a couple of new exclusives the other day.
I didn't see.
Yeah, DC signed on. Who did they sign on? Jorge Jimenez. I saw that.
Oh, nice.
Another great artist named Jorge. He I've been really kind of jonesing on his stuff for a while. It looks like Javier Fernandez over on Nightwing they just did an exclusive with. So I think, cool. and they the fact that they've great talent like Doug Mahnke, Pat Gleason, even though I know Pat is co-writing Superman over with Pete Tomasi, Ivan Reis, who I read DC's Justice League of America Rebirth, and he just knocks that out of the park. It looks beautiful.
Oh yeah.
And so I think now that DC is sort of pivoted back in terms of finding who its characters are again, and sort of taking a stronger angle on characters that I think had been flagging in recent years. I think that's going to be the next big challenge is who's the DC artists of the future? To steal from Marvel, who's DC's young guns? And I think as DC finds that from a variety of different places, whether it's from Image, whether it's from Valiant, whether it's from Boom or Dynamite, I think by hook or by crook, however they're going to get them, I think that's when all cylinders are going to be firing, I think.
Very cool. Yeah, we'll see. It's like I said, I both houses have their issues to resolve, and I think DC got a jump on things last May with Rebirth, and now it's Marvel's turn to kind of fix things, and I think they will.
Yeah, and
obviously,
and like we were saying earlier, so much of this is based on cycles, And the thing is Marvel and DC have lived and survived as long as they have because of the strength of their characters and the strength of the creative teams behind them. And I think, there's always going to be shakeups, whether it's on the heels of an event or whether it's a company trying to sort of fine-tune what their voice is and figure, sort of remind people why people love that company in the first place. But I think ultimately, it's very easy to wax catastrophic about the big two. And I think it's one of those things. The strengths of those companies are obvious and apparent, and they're not going away. Right. It's ironic to be talking about companies that big and that established as having growing pains, but I think, I think they are always going to be the standard bearers, in a way that some of the other publishers, because they don't have that history and they don't have that cachet, they're not going to be. And I think there's always going to be warts to the big two and their products, but I think sure. In certain ways, I actually feel really hopeful, and I feel like we're really on an upswing, and I think things are just, the best is yet to come. And I have to say, as a comics fan, as a superhero fan, that feels really good to say.
There you go, man. And I would agree. And I think, you try things. Ultimately, these guys try things, and again, because of the monthly schedules, even a bi-monthly schedule, you can only do so many stories per year with each character, and you're kind of stuck with the partner you've chosen as far as the creatives to move on as a company. And again, they can't spin on a dime, but ultimately they'll right the ships. And I agree. I am very optimistic as somebody 20 years down the line from you. I think, literally. No, honestly, and I do. I appreciate that perspective, and I think your World War II perspective is very interesting in terms of specifically, what worked and what didn't work in Cap and the first Avenger. And I do think that going back to that Wonder Woman movie, that's going to be a very interesting challenge, because I do think World War I is even more removed than World War II, and it is such a more bleak war than World War II was, not to mitigate the horrors of any war, but knowing, what we do about World War I and really just how they fought it and how it was, it's going to be very interesting to put Wonder Woman in that in that world, as opposed to the World War II world. That's very ambitious, and it's very different, and we'll see how it pans out. But David, I appreciate the talk. I think we did good. And I think people should absolutely check out Spencer and Locke. Go to the Facebook page for Spencer and Locke for the easiest access to the 6-page preview. But I really do think you'll get a good feel for what the guys are doing. Thank
you so much for your time, John. We really appreciate it. And everybody just feel free to pre-order our book. Again, the pre-order code is Feb171047. You can call your local comic shops, and they will gladly pre-order it for you.
Excellent. And anything on the horizon for Newsarama? Or are you steeped in comic book writing mode right now?
I'm steeped in comic book writing mode. Ask me again in a month when I've woken up from this publicity coma. And I've got a few other irons in the fire, a few other projects that I'm really excited to keep developing. And as soon as we have a publisher behind them, I will be excited to tell everybody.
Excellent, man. Please come back, and congrats on Spencer and Locke to you. Of
course. Thank you so much, man. Have a great night.
David Pepose. Make sure you check out Spencer and Locke from Action Lab. Again, I really enjoyed that first issue. Check out the 6-page preview on the Spencer and Locke page at facebook.com, and they will give you other links as well. But really, order this book. It's a lot of fun, and as I always say, if they're on Word Balloon, I like it. It's that simple. I don't get into reviews or things like that. I pretty much have the guests on that represent the products that I like. And what the guys did with Spencer and Locke is a prime example of that. Check it out for yourself. Thanks again for listening to today's Word Balloon. It's brought to you by In Stock Trades at InStockTrades.com. There's some really neat stuff out this month from In Stock Trades. It's Black History Month, and Ron Wimberly has a very cool hardcover that he's created called Black History in Its Own Words. 42% off for this image book. It's $9.85. You can also get Empress from Stuart Immonen and Mark Miller, and it's great to see them back together again on a very cool creator-owned book. Is this through Icon? I think this is through Icon. Empress Volume 1 is 42% off. It's just $14.49. You can get Nameless from Grant Morrison and my buddy Chris Burnham, a tremendous image book, and get the 1 through 6 collection, and it is 42% off, $8.69. There's Cloak and Dagger. Shadows and Light is the name of that collection, and it's some classic stuff from Marvel back in the prime of Cloak and Dagger. 42% off. It's just $20.29. There's Weird Detective. The trade paperback is out. Fred Van Lente and Guy Villanova's excellent series from Dark Horse. I certainly hope there's more. It starts off great, and this collects the first arc 1 through 5, but really harkens back to the fun pulp magazines of the prime of the 30s and 40s, and it's a great mashup of horror pulp and detective pulp in Weird Detective from Guy Villanova and Fred Van Lente. Let's see how much this is. 42% off, $10.43. Great deals at InStockTrades.com. I'm telling you, you're going to go to the site and find books and say, holy cow, I can afford even more with these prices. Great stuff waiting for you at InStockTrades.com. Thanks again for listening to Word Balloon today. Thank you, League of Word Balloon listeners, for your continued support. Man, some big activity is coming up. I should let you know, in about a month, I will be in Salt Lake City. It's the first time I've ever gone to Utah. I am really excited because I've never been to Utah, and I am interested in the city. I had a chance in the 90s when the Bulls were playing the Jazz in the NBA Finals, and I wasn't able to go. So 20 years later, I finally get to go to Utah for the FanX, part of the Salt Lake City Con. But it's their spring show, FanX. Really excited. My buddy Marty Pasco is going to be there. Marv Wolfman is going to be there. Lots of really interesting celebrities. Nerdelebities, am I saying that right? Heidi McDonald? I forget how she says it, but yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun from the TV and movie people that are going to be there, and also the comic book people that are going to be there. More information on that as I find out, because I'm not even sure how many panels I'm doing and which panels I'm specifically doing. I put in for 5. I have a feeling I'll be doing the Marv Wolfman Spotlight, which I'm really looking forward to. I haven't talked to Marv in an interview capacity really since our only interview, 12 years ago. It was, I think, in the first year of Word Balloon or the second year of Word Balloon. And this is going to be a lot of fun. I saw him in San Diego, and I said, Marv, if you want to come back. And he said, I don't know if podcasts are really my thing. And that's fine, but I know he's comfortable in a panel capacity doing interviews. So this is going to be great. But I've really enjoyed some of the things that Marv has done in the last couple of years. He did a Suicide Squad book that was really, really good, and you should seek it out, a novel. His novels are terrific. And, I always love a good comic book novel because it feels like a deep cut. And you get, I think, more inside a character's mind in a novel because of the length of it, as opposed to the brevity of a single issue of a comic. And, Marv knows what he's doing. So I'm looking forward to that, and a new talk with Marty, and a whole lot more at FanX in Salt Lake City. That's happening St. Patrick's Day weekend. So if you haven't got your tickets, go do that, and I will see you there. I'm really looking forward to it. More conversation coming up in just a couple days here at Word Balloon. So be looking, and you'll see a new show this week as well. Until next time, Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2017.